Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we would find down when we travel to the very bottom of the ocean and check out those ocean floors. They have a lot of different features, just like if you were on land, you know, we see lots of different things. We see mountains and we see rivers and valleys and all those things. Well, underneath the ocean, they have a lot of different cool features too. So we're going to talk about those today. The first one is a continental shelf. And kind of like the name implies, and most of these, their name kind of helps you out with what it actually is. It's continental, so it's next to our continents. And it's a shelf. It's just a piece of land. It's not going to be super deep. And it's basically going to kind of stick out around all of the continental land. And it's going from the shoreline out. And here is a picture of the United States. And then all of these boxes that come off of there are all of the continental shelves that kind of surround the United States. So it's kind of good to see. You know, it comes out a little ways away from the land that we know of today. At the end of the continental shelf is something called a continental slope. And that's going to slope downward pretty steeply at the edge of the continental shelf. So the continental shelf is a pretty well-defined area. So you've got your shelf, and then the slope comes down pretty dramatically. In that area of the continental shelf and then that slope, they have something called submarine canyons, and kind of like canyons that we know about that are great big deep areas or features. It's the same type of thing, but with the term submarine, that's where submarines can go down and explore and kind of check out the different life that's in those canyon areas. And that cuts down pretty deeply. If you keep going out, you might come across an ocean trench. And the trench is going to be your deepest point in the oceans. And they go, again, like the name implies, they come to a pretty dramatic cut down, and then they come back up. So they're not real wide. They can be over 11,000 meters deep. So, I mean, we're talking extremely deep compared to, the continental shelf. And an example of an ocean trench is the Mariana Trench. The next feature, and this is just kind of like, when you're out on the plains in, let's say, Wyoming or South Dakota, Nebraska, the Midwest has a lot of nice flat areas. So the abyssal plain is an example of those nice flat areas that you would find under the ocean. They are deep, and then they're going to be covered with a nice thick layer of sediment. So if you were going to farm down at the bottom of the ocean, I guess this would probably be a good place to do it. A mid-ocean ridge. We've talked a little bit about mid-ocean ridges. Those are chains of mountains that are going to run through an ocean basin. And the ocean is going to be covered with different mid-ocean ridges, kind of like a baseball is covered with the stitches. Those are going to kind of pull the ocean together. And then, of course, we have to talk about mountains. We obviously have lots of mountains up on Earth where we can see them. And down in the ocean, they also have mountains. They don't call them mountains. They call them seamounts. So a seamount is just the special name that they give mountains that are in the ocean. Now, with all these cool features down there, we want to know, how can we get down there and check them out? You can do some scuba diving, and scuba gear is going to allow you to go about 130 feet is the range that scuba gear will allow you to go. And then the tanks of oxygen that you are supplied with will last about an hour. So that's a pretty good way that you could go and explore the ocean floor. Obviously, submarines are going to be able to go a lot deeper than 130 feet. And with technology today, they allow you to go a lot further, actually. In March of 2012, James Cameron, who's a big film guru, had his own submarine design. It was about 25 feet long, kind of a torpedo-shaped submarine, and had lots of cameras and things like that on it. And he went down into the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest known part of the ocean, about 7 miles deep. And he went down, traveled down there, and he stayed at the bottom for about 6 hours and collected samples and took a lot of footage down there. And, we wait to see what his discoveries will bring. And then the last thing, after we have figured out what's down there, we need to know how can we map the ocean floor and how can we find out more about it. There's two main ways that we can map it and figure out what's down there. The first one is called sonar. Boats will use sonar pretty commonly. It's a system that uses sound waves to measure that distance to locate objects, kind of like echolocation with bats, how they use that. And when those sound waves, if they are bouncing back really closely together, that means that that ship is in a very shallow area. And if they are bouncing back and they're far apart, the person on the ship knows that they are in a nice deep area. So that's something that helps ships not run into a continental shelf or something like that. The second way that they can map ocean floors is through satellite imaging. It's very efficient, helps with large areas, and it's going to be a very accurate method to map the ocean floors. So just a little bit of a refresher. We want to make sure that we know the different terms for the things that you're going to find down in the ocean, the continental shelf, the slope, the trench, and things like that, how we can explore that, and then what terms we use to actually map that, the sonar and the satellite imaging. Okay, today's lesson we're going to talk about how the water in the ocean actually moves around and what those things are called. First of all, we need to know that the water in the ocean is going to be moving in something called an ocean current. Okay? Ocean current is a mass of moving water and protecting a large mass. And those are going to be able to distribute the heat throughout the water and the nutrients throughout the water. You have to remember lots of living organisms in the ocean, and the sun is going to be coming down on that surface layer. And so in order for the rest of the ocean to get a little bit of that heat, you have to have some kind of movement. So the currents are going to pull the nutrients and that energy from the sun through the water. There are two major types of currents. Surface currents are when you have strong winds and they blow over the top of the ocean, and they're going to cause that current to flow. They only go about 1 to 200 meters deep. That's how much the wind above is going to affect the ocean below. What affects the path of the currents is going to be, and it's going to be a little bit different depending on the hemisphere that you're in. And I drew a picture up here of, and I just simplified it, but of Earth, and we've got our North Pole and our South Pole, and then our equator running across the middle. And in the northern hemisphere, the currents are going to go clockwise, just like a clock would turn, a clock with hands. And then in the southern hemisphere, it's going to turn counterclockwise. And that's one of the things that's going to affect the path of that current. The reason they don't turn the same way, as you're probably thinking to yourself, why are they going different directions? Remember, your equator is going to get the most sunlight, and so that's going to be your warmest point. So the warmer water is going to want to go towards the poles. So from here, the equator is going to go towards the pole this way, and for the South Pole, it's just going to go in the counterclockwise direction. The shape of the continents is also something else that's going to kind of have an influence on the direction that the currents flow. Obviously, if they hit a piece of land, they can't go in that direction, so they have to work their way around the land formations. For deep currents, a little bit different. The water density is going to determine the path of the deep currents. It's also going to be affected by the temperature of the water and the salinity. We've talked about the salinity. If the salinity is higher, which means there's more salt in that amount of water, it's going to be more dense. If something's more dense, it's going to sink to the bottom. If something is less dense, it's going to rise to the top. The same is true with temperature. If the water is cold, those molecules are going to be really close together and they're going to sink because that makes them more dense. If the water molecules are warmer, they want to spread out, they want to get farther apart, they're going to be less dense and they're going to rise to the top. So with the deep current, the amount of salt and then the temperature of that water is going to play a big key in how those currents will move. Downwelling is just the surface water moving downward, and this is a process that has to happen because it's going to take the oxygen from the air and it's going to bring it down into that ocean water for the organisms down there to have oxygen. Okay, that oxygen has to get in somehow. The opposite of downwelling is going to be upwelling. Upwelling is going to be the ocean water comes in and it's going to hit the continental shelf and it's going to move up and it's going to bring nutrients upward. And so wherever there is an area of upwelling, which is more of a vertical area, the animals and organisms are going to like that area because it has all the nutrients in it and they can go and get those nutrients. Climate and weather can interact with currents. If you look at the Gulf Stream, and this is an old map, it's actually a Benjamin Franklin map, but here's the side of the United States, and then this is showing the Atlantic Ocean, and it's showing that Gulf Stream kind of heading over towards Europe. And the Gulf Stream is moving that warm air, and that's going to change the weather over in England, Great Britain, Europe, and those areas. It's kind of funny because they are about at the same latitude or distance from the equator as Canada, yet Canada has lots of ice and snow and it's cold, while England, it doesn't get that way. It's usually pretty nice, maybe a little bit more wet, and that's due a large part to that Gulf Stream bringing that warm air. The last thing I want to talk about is El Nino. El Nino is kind of something that the meteorologists talk about, and it's something that causes kind of a disturbance or kind of a change in the pattern in the Pacific Ocean. And it's when those currents are just something different happens with them. And it can happen every between 3 and 7 years. So every 3 to 7 years, El Nino hits, and the scientists know that something is going to be different, and it could give us a stronger winter with more snow. It could make it less snow. It can make it more rainy. It just messes with the weather, and it changes the weather from the norm. So they can take measurements, and this is a satellite image, and they can take those satellite images and detect the temperatures in the ocean, and by checking those and comparing comparing them, they can tell whether it's going to be a stronger winter or weaker or whatever, however El Nino is going to affect everyone. So those are a few good things that you need to know. You want to make sure that you keep in mind how El Nino affects things, the downwelling and the upwelling, and then just the different ways that the currents are going to travel.
Wait,
Okay, I want to show you an example of using while loops that I really like. We have a new block that we're going to be using called path is clear, and it returns true if the path is clear in front of us. So we can look at the options here. It can be ahead of us or to the right or to the left. We can change to whatever we need. In this case, we're going to move the alien all the way down to the spaceship. So we're going to use a while loop. And we're going to say while the path is clear ahead, what do we want to do? We want to move forward, and then we want to turn, move down, and then turn again. So we can repeat that. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you know, it doesn't really matter how many times, but when we finally get here, the path won't be clear ahead and we'll stop. So it's a tricky way of ending a while loop. Remember, while loops don't care how many times they run. They'll keep doing the same thing as long as they need to until the condition here becomes false. All right, so we're going to run until the path is no longer clear. We're going to move forward. We're going to turn, we better turn left, and then we're going to move forward again, and then we're going to turn right. See how we're going to stair step down to the spaceship? Every loop will take one step on the stairs, and then we'll loop again, then we'll loop again. Okay? Once we get to the bottom, we're going to be right here, and we'll say the path is not clear ahead of us, and we will stop right there. So we need to climb into the spaceship in order for this to be a successful mission. Okay, let's go ahead and run it and see if it works. Now, if you watch really carefully, you'll see the alien sensing every time to see if the path is clear ahead. Now we climb into the spaceship. Hey, we made it. So this is a powerful new block that we can use in a lot of different ways to be able to know if there's something in front of us. Think about it kind of like you would for a robot that needs to drive along and stop or turn and move around an obstacle in the way. The robot has to be able to detect that somehow. It would use some type of sensor, maybe an ultrasound sensor or some type of distance measurement with a laser or something, but some way it would have to know whether or not the path is clear in front of it. And that's the same kind of thing we're doing here. So let's take a quick look at the code. You see, here's our while loop. While the path is clear ahead, we move forward. We turn left. And then we move forward and we turn right. And then we start over. Is the path still clear ahead? Then we move forward, we turn left, we move forward, we turn right. And when we finally get to a point where the path is not clear, then we step out of this loop and we run this function here, climb onto spaceship. So I think you'll find that this is a really fun block to use because it makes it so we can write a program that will work in a lot more situations. We're not counting the number of steps the character needs to move, we're telling him while there's room in front of you, move forward. So have fun.
You